Welcome to Higher Ed Live, the live weekly web show all about the world of higher education. We're all about digital development and professional empowerment. I am your host, Seth Odell. Let's take a look. Dual cameras going on today. Why not, right? Why not? So I am your host, Seth Odell, and as we get started tonight, I want to give a very nice thank you to our sponsors that help make our show possible. So thank you to Integral. HigherEdLive is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. That happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and I'm going to send out a tweet with a link to that in a matter of moments. As well, I'd like to thank Omni Update, the leading web content management system, CMS provider for higher education. The company's web CMS OU campus is secure and scalable with great tools and features, deployment flexibility, and you know what? An awesome user community to boot. In fact, it was the highest ranked CMS in customer satisfaction in a 2010 EDU Guru survey. So if you need a CMS, check it out at omniupdate.com. Welcome back to Higher Ed Live. As I said, I am your host, Seth Odell, and today we're talking about a content-first approach to the higher ed web. And I have two guests joining me today. I'm going to go ahead and bring them both on right now. So please, everyone, digital round of applause for Georgy Cohen and Rick Allen, the folks behind MeetContent.com. How's it going, guys?
Good.
Going
man.
great.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to have you guys here. I'm happy to be having this conversation with both of you. It looks like we got a little bit of disfocus with the webcam on that end, but that's okay because we can hear you loud and clear, and that is all that matters. So we're going to work this out. So, guys, you know the drill. We are going to be talking all about content-first approach to higher ed web. This is a subject that I don't know a lot about, but I'm very interested in. And that's why I tracked down the two biggest guests that I could find in our industry, two folks that a lot of us are friends with, to talk all about this. But first, we can't just dive right into the subject, because that's not what we do here at Higher Ed Live. So what do? The Weekly 5. 5 stories from around the web that you should think about, read, star, put on your to-do list. You should do something about it, because these stories are worth following. That's right, Weekly 5 is back. I apologize for missing out on it last week, but you know what? It's here this week, so there's no complaints, right? No complaints at all. So let's dive right into the first story of the week. And let's see what we got going on. It's first story for the Weekly 5 is going to be, are you ready? Drum roll, drum roll, drum roll. All right, a Pew Internet study that's come out that I saw this week that offers just, honestly, guys, a mountain of social media stats regarding usage of certain sites, how people use it, time of day, what they do. I can't even pull out my favorite thing on this study. I looked through the whole thing. It's just massive amount of information. I just can't stress enough. The link is out there. It's a PDF. Note before you click it. But guys, check this thing out. It's pretty cool, and it's worth something you guys just put on your reading list this week at some point. I just think you're gonna really appreciate having it because you know what, guys, at the end of the day, it's always about information. So that's the Weekly 1. Let's knock out the Weekly 2. Did you guys know that you can remove that pesky YouTube logo from your video embeds? That's right, when you embed a YouTube video, you no longer actually have to have the YouTube logo come up. If you see in this picture here, there's no YouTube button, there's no YouTube overlay. It's not that hard. You actually just have to add a code, which is modest branding equals 1 to the end of the URL in an embed code. So I'm going to link out with a link just to have that code if you guys want to have it. But if you embed YouTube videos for your campus at all, this is just great. It's great to be able to remove that. It's nice of YouTube to be able to give that feature to us. So let's move right along to the Weekly. Now it's 3. And this is just, by the numbers, Foursquare versus Facebook Places versus Gowalla at West Virginia University. You guys know Dave Olson, the man behind Mobile in Higher Ed, the blog. There we go, Meet Mobile in Higher Ed. Whatever, it is what it is. It's a great blog. He's a great guy. He put out some stats just on his campus regarding Foursquare, Facebook Places, Gowalla. Biggest couple takeaways are, one is Facebook Places totally works if you have a campaign behind it, which his institution did. And the other big thing to note is, Gowalla just doesn't exist. Really. The numbers, show it just barely exists at all. So, great. Thanks to Dave for putting those numbers out, though. I really do appreciate it. I think it's really helpful for us to be able to have those and see what it's like on his campus. The next one. I attended EduCom in Orlando, Florida this week. Had a great time to meet with a lot of people. And one of the people I met up with was David Pogue from the New York Times, a tech columnist. So, just today, we posted our video interview with him, but I met up with him. I put a camera in his face, got him on camera, asked him a bunch of questions about tech and higher ed, And it's a great little piece, guys. It's like 4 minutes, but I suggest checking it out. It's interesting to see what someone outside of higher ed who's so heavily involved in tech, thinks about it. So the next one, guys, the weekly 5, I'm going to be honest. Okay, this next one is actually coming tomorrow. So then I know I should put it in next week's, but I'm putting it in this week's because while at EduCom, I got schooled on QR codes by somebody. And I've been probably the biggest hater of QR codes lately, getting into it with a lot of people about why I don't like them. And I got schooled and was shown a really amazing use of QR codes, actually. So I'm going to bring that to you guys tomorrow in a blog post over at HigherEdLive.com. And I'm just going to break down one really good way to use QR codes because I was really impressed with it and I want to be able to share that with all you guys. So that's going to be coming, but you know what? It's not coming until tomorrow. So you're going to just have to bear with me because I was traveling, couldn't quite get it up. I know. So that's the weekly 5. Let's move right on to the unsolicited shout out of the week. And not higher ed related, but this week it's going out to my dad. That's right, my dad. Happy Father's Day to you. Not only is it Father's Day, but my dad was in the paper today. There was a nice article about my father and great-grandfather in the Times-Union in Albany, New York. So props to you, Dad. This shout-out is to you. And that's the unsolicited shout-out. That's the weekly 5, and that's the way we do it here at Higher Ed Live. So let's just go ahead, guys. Get right into this. I can't stress enough. You guys know the rules, but use the hashtag HigherEdLive. Let's pull it up right now. Let's get everybody up on screen. Let's pull up that hashtag. If you guys have questions or comments at all for myself, but really it's going to be for our guests today, Rick and Georgie, if you have questions for them, get them out there with the Higher Ed Live hashtag. We are tracking it right now. We are reading it, and we're going to ask all the questions that you guys possibly throw our way. So, let's dive right in, guys, to this topic. Let's just do this. Let's have some fun and make this happen. So, when we're talking
about is fun.
Exactly, content is fun. It can be, and we're going to prove that today. So, all right, so when we're talking about the content-first approach to higher ed web, that's the subject for today. So, first, as we get into this, why don't you guys just tell us a little bit about MeetContent, which is the site that you both run. What is it? What are your goals? And maybe just a little bit about content strategy. Let's get the ball rolling.
So we first sort of came up with the idea for MeetContent, kind of coming off of all the conferences last fall, High Ed Web, SimTech in Vegas, and all these conversations we were having with people about content. And at the end of all that, it just kind of seemed obvious that there really needed to be a space for people to talk about this stuff, to learn about it, that people were doing a lot of good work, and people also had a lot of good questions. So that sort of compelled us to create a resource, create MeetContent as a place to sort of share what we knew and also sort of respond to other ideas and things that were happening in higher ed around content. I think that content comes up in a lot of contexts, a lot of conversations around higher ed, but we really thought that it deserved a place to give it the focus that it needs, that it deserves.
Great. So tell us a little bit more. What else can people find on the site? I mean, you guys have just a ton of articles. I just can't stress enough, guys. I'm pulling up a picture of this right now. If you haven't yet, get over to MeetContent.com because you guys just have a ton of content, I guess.
We try. Aside from our sort of core blog, we also have a on-topic blog, which sort of curates interesting links and gives some higher ed context on what people are talking about in the field of content strategy and online content, even online journalism, and bringing that into it. We have a library of resources, could be sort of foundational articles, presentations, slide decks, videos, ebooks, the whole range. So when people are just like, I really need to know more about social media content, that we've collected resources that can help them figure that out and sort of point them in the right direction. And blog rolls as well. So we really just want to be a resource.
Plus, we have a budding LinkedIn group and some other.
That's right. So we're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn group, which is really more of a resource just for people who are in higher ed talking about web content to come together, ask questions, share ideas, etc.
Great.
A lot of people are coming into this, hearing these discussions and joining in on them and realizing, oh my gosh, I do content strategy in my role. I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. I think that's how a lot of people come into this. A lot of people have been doing very similar work or related work and then are discovering, oh, this is content strategy. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think not everyone realizes, what they do with content strategy and or what their role is, how it affects them. That's why I'm happy to talk about this today. It deserves a spotlight. As someone in the industry, I appreciate the work that you guys do with MeetContent.com. It's a huge resource. So let's dive into the subject today. We're talking about a content-first approach to higher ed. We're not trying to tackle everything in the world with content strategy, but we're definitely focusing on this one area. So, when we say content-first approach to higher ed web, what do we mean by that, and why is that approach so important?
Well, a content content is needed to support all of our, all the work on the web. I mean, no one on the web can do great work if the content stinks. A designer can't create an effective design without understanding the content needs. A developer can't come up with a good technology solution without understanding the purpose of the content. A marketer can't come up with a marketing, plan without the content to support it. So, and when you talk about it like this, people are very quick to nod and agree, oh yes, content is important. But when push comes to shove, content is rarely the priority on web projects. And it always ends up being something that's addressed in the 11th hour. And people are saying, well, can't we just make do with lorem ipsum, for our designs? Or can't we just figure out the governance model after launch? Or can't we just make do with what we have now and then fix it later? And so the content first approach, really what kind of made me an evangelist for content strategy was a meeting I had once upon a time. It was a marketing meeting, and the marketing director was talking about, why aren't people visiting our website? We're promoting it, we're telling people to go there, but people aren't going there, or at least they're not going back again. And I raised my hand and said, well, there's no incentive for people to go there. The content is outdated. It's not useful or usable. And she said, yes, but so there's a content problem, but how are we going to promote it? And it kept saying, well, kind of putting the cart before the horse. And then she said, well, I can see maybe it's like the chicken or the egg. And I'm like, no, it's nothing like the chicken or the egg. Content has to come first. You can't promote something as useful or usable or valuable if it doesn't exist. You can't tell people to go to your website for the latest when there's nothing new there.
Yeah.
So content first. And a lot of this discussion, we're trying to talk about how a content first approach helps other people in related web disciplines do better work, whether it's designers or developers or marketers.
Yeah.
Content.
Well, I mean, I think it's so important. The way you spell it out is so true. I mean, there's a lot of institutions, I think, that would, try to tackle like, oh, we need to work on a new CMS, and they'll put all this time and effort into think about what's our approach, but yet they never think about what's going to be there when it's finished. And you're right, it can't come afterwards, especially when so much of it impacts your decisions, even on basic things like framework or how you build things or anything else. The content needs to be there first. I think that makes sense. But clearly as an industry, we're not really quite there yet. So, where are we right now as an industry with content? Because it seems like content has been marginalized largely by a lot of institutional approaches. So, where are we today as we talk about where we should be throughout this program?
Well, I mean, it's easy to understand why content is marginalized. I mean, content is a mess. Nobody wants to deal with it. It's easier to tackle things that make more sense, that are a little bit simpler to look at. I mean, the three big things that I talk about when kind of why content is, such a big problem in higher ed. I mean, content is massive. It's overwhelming. Who's going to deal with this? And where do you start? Content is political. I mean, there's so many competing priorities and stakeholders. How do you get everybody on the same page? Content is time consuming. I mean, in higher ed, time and resources is always a big problem. So, how do you fix a content problem when you don't have unlimited resources to fix this seemingly unlimited amount of content? Mm-hmm. But I've worked in higher ed a long time, and although these are like really valid challenges, these are real world challenges, but they're lousy excuses because they're not new challenges. We've always had to deal with these things. And we have to take ownership for them and make them work. So we need new excuses.
Hey, I love that. I think it's good to hold us all accountable and have this conversation and talk about this today, because you're right. It's, it's clearly, no one needs to own the problem and say I created it, but we all have to own the fact that we aren't providing a solution if we're not on our campus. And, and I think that definitely has to be said today, that we need to all work on finding solutions. So, one thing that you guys have spoken about before through different blog posts is, building relationships around effective creation and management of content. Like, how do you do it? That's kind of one of the big loaded questions. So that's the question I'm going to throw at you guys now is, how do you actually build relationships around effective creation and management of content? How do you make this happen?
I think a lot of times, the people who are doing content, whether it's for their department or at a central level or for their school, are sort of these like little islands, these little people who are sort of like have to deal with, all the competing interests and have to sort of wade through that morass that Rick was just describing of politics and massiveness and all those components of the project. And I feel like there's strength in numbers. And I feel like part of how we can help, with the content process is by developing relationships with other people at our school, across our university, and finding the other people who are dealing with these problems and sharing a little bit that we figured out with them that might match up with the part that they haven't figured out. And then the part that they figured out that we're still struggling with, matching up and sharing what we know. I was talking to Rick before the show, and I was calling it islands of pain, where it's just like we all are sort of suffering alone. But like, let's get an archipelago. Like, let's all sort of bridge the gap and connect to one another so that we can all learn a little bit. When I was, Rick and I were both at Confab, the Content Strategy Conference in May, and to our surprise and delight, there were tons of higher ed people there, dozens and dozens and dozens. They had 2 higher ed lunch tables the first day, and they had to expand it to 4 tables the second day because there were so many of us who wanted to connect with one another and talk about what we were doing with content. I think that everyone was so excited to talk to other people in a higher ed context who are doing content work and sort of share what they were doing. And so the biggest takeaways that we got from our conversations with all those folks was that, it's a matter of sharing what you know and making connections and starting small. And often starting small is going to be just like grabbing someone in the hall or having coffee with them and having a conversation. It's going to be incremental. It's going to happen bit by bit, but gradually one conversation turns into an editorial meeting, turns into a larger process, and helps inform and ripple out. So I think that the more you can connect with people at your institution to sort of share and connect and sort of build that critical mass of people like, hey, we're all the people who do content. We're going to learn from each other, and we're going to become institutionalized, sort of. I think that the more you can do that, the more that helps.
Yeah. Now, it's kind of a loaded question. Again, I love loaded questions. Who, when it comes to building relationships, is this something that, anybody can do? I mean, do you look at this as, a centralized office needs to be the one having this conversation on campus? Or like you said, when I think of an institution like, UCLA, we have thousands of people that are in the content strategy, content creation business. You know what I mean? Like, so many of us do it on some capacity. Does this need to be like a formal centralized voice, or could this be something where it's just 2 people that work down the hallway from each other start with themselves?
I think that it's almost, in a decentralized organization, it's the hardest place to be is at a central level, because you see the big picture, but you can't do anything about it. So sort of to that point, I think that you have to sort of grassroots it a little bit. Like you might think that, at the central level that you're going to have power, maybe depending on your university you might, but actually the more central you are, the more you have to grassroots it and just try to identify, okay, where are all the channels? Who are all the people who maintain those channels? What are their needs? What can I do at the central level? Can I provide templates? Can I, create a style guide? Can I, get buy-in around that style guide? Can I, develop workshops? Can I develop training? Like, what can I do at the central level to help support what everyone else needs? And can I connect with them and let them know? It's like, let's figure this out. Let's come together. What do you guys need? Do you need resources? Do you need templates? Like, what's missing here? And just try to sort of scrabble it together.
And that's a really important thing to understand, because people hear, talks on content strategy, and there's this big holistic approach from the top down, and people are like, well, I can't make this work in my institution. I'm the content advocate, and I'm right here, and here's where the decision makers are. So how am I supposed to influence change here from a content perspective? And you have to start small. Mm-hmm. You have to look from a wide-angle lens to see what's going on. You need to have a holistic perspective, but make change start small. To get there.
I was talking earlier, you might have like your own little secret playbook of like that holistic perspective of ideally this is the way things are going to be, but no one's ready to hear that playbook yet. So I'm going to do what's on page 17 right here, or page 1 or whatever. I'm going to do this little bit, and that's going to be enough for now. And tomorrow I'll do the second bit, and then maybe the third day I'll be able to do 2 more bits, and maybe I'll get more people on my side, and then maybe at some point you'll have enough of those conversations, and you'll have enough change that you've affected that you could say, here's a holistic way of looking at this, and here's sort of what I've been thinking about. And again, that takes time, that takes patience, that takes sort of building the network and building the process bit by bit.
Yeah. And while there are some like fundamental processes associated with content strategy, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for every organization. So the strategy part is making it work for your organization. So it's not that you're going to come, go to MeetContent and you're going to find this prepackaged content strategy you can take and just bring to your school and make work.
Do that.
Oh, that is a good idea.
Yeah.
But it's understanding the resources that you have, understanding the content needs and your website goals, and then coming up with a content strategy that supports those things.
Yeah. So. Now, when you're talking about that, and you're talking about helping people think differently about content and the resources needed, let's talk a little bit about resources needed as far as like actual manpower. I mean, is this something where we're looking at like a content strategist position within a communications department? And if so, I mean, is that enough? Is this like one new job on campus? Or are we talking about a lot more than that?
I mean, at its base level, content strategy, there's actually no necessarily content creation involved in it. It's the planning for all this stuff. A lot of people are involved in creating and sustaining a website. We have come a long way from the jack of all trades, webmaster role that can, do everything that you need for your website. Content strategist is just one of many web disciplines that are needed to support it. And
that said, in higher ed, we don't always have the luxury of like hiring all the staff that we need. So oftentimes you might be someone who is, I'm also the writer, but I'm also the content strategist. Or I'm the project manager, but I'm also the content strategist, or whatever. And I think that part of what content strategy as a discipline is helping us do, and as an emerging discipline really, is defining what the roles are and what the components are of making content work, and thinking about content as its own thing and not just the 11th hour, oh, by the way, we need this. I feel like with the emergence of the web, when web development and web design, those are sort of new things that sort of emerge, and it was like, here they are, it's this new thing. It's like, oh, okay. But in the beginning, I think a lot of the content that we had was just sort of, well, let's take the magazine and put it on the web, or let's take the annual report and put it on the web, or let's take our course bulletin and put it on the web. It was a lot of repurposing, a lot of copying and pasting, a lot of just sort of putting it out there. And I think what we're really, what content strategy helps us do, and sort of the thinkers around it and the publications around it, helps us say, wait, this is its own thing too. This is just like web design and just like web development, just like all of that. And we need to think about it in a particular way to make it really work. We can't just be like, well, just put it up. Just put it up is not a strategy. And that's going to bite you, down the line, because, you're going to have users who have problems, and you're not going to achieve your goals. You're not going to get your messaging across, and all those things are going to be impacted by an ineffective content strategy if you approach it with a just put it up mentality. So over time, hopefully, we might have to sort of, do what we can now with our roles to sort of make it happen. But over time, hopefully, we can make the argument for we need someone whose job is just to think about this stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, as an industry, we clearly haven't been, I wouldn't say structured, but we haven't been set up in a way where the manpower resources are put to this as a subject matter that calls for broader conversation and a time commitment. I'm just curious if you have an opinion on this at all. Where do the roles change in a current higher ed setup? I mean, if you went into a campus, like, what are the people that are most involved in this that could step up and be more of a content strategist, within their current role? Is it, are we talking about webmasters or marketing people or all of the above? Whose roles would change the most the more a campus would embrace this?
I think it might depend on who you have around and who is, I think that anyone could come to it if they have the right mentality around it. I don't think that, there's like, talking to people that went to Confab, it was like everyone comes from such diverse backgrounds. It could be journalism, it could be marketing, it could have been, information architecture, like all these sort of backgrounds, and then sort of coming around to this idea of like, well, to really make this work, I need to start thinking about content, and oh, look, I'm a content strategist. So I don't think that like there's one rule. It's like it has to be the web writers, or it has to be the web project managers, or whatever. It's going to be the people who have the passion and the process to sort of just help execute it.
Yeah, and I think, on the topic of content strategy as change management, I think a lot of the responsibility on this role is to educate people. Help make your web designer to be a content advocate. Help make your web developer a content advocate. Help them understand how this process supports their work. And then also helping people to do better content work on the web. I've worked in a lot of organizations where there are some excellent writers, but they're they're copywriters familiar most with like print media and stuff like that. But they're not. It's not that they're opposed to writing for the web or working on the web. They just haven't been educated on it. And their expertise is incredibly valuable. So just making good use of that and training and educating people.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And like I say, and that's something I think that I talk about this a lot, but when it comes to the web, I mean, clearly the web emerged in higher education. Geez, I mean, now we're talking obviously 20 years ago, but it emerged in a fashion where it was like, okay, do what we can to keep up, but it wasn't like, let's strategically think about shifting things. And in some ways, I think it's still the case so far. If we do have people who said like, oh, I'm a really good writer, I can write great press releases, and like, if you're a great writer, you're a great writer. You just need to understand the strategy behind the platform you're writing for.
Absolutely.
And
like every medium is unique. Like, could I, I can do stuff on the web. Could I go and do a magazine right now? I would probably have a lot of problems because that's not the medium I'm used to working in and thinking about. It has a whole other kind of process than thinking about web content does. So
yeah, but ideally, you're right that if you could find a way to have these conversations on your campus and make people, have this multidisciplinary mindset where like I can write for different platforms or I can do things for different platforms, and it's just a matter of having the resources and kind of the community and the people there to help you learn how to do it. Like you said, you might not be able to do a magazine today, but could you do a magazine in a couple months if somebody worked with you? Sure, And it's the same thing for the web in a lot of ways, that we've brought great talented people together, but maybe we haven't connected all the dots yet if folks don't have that same experience.
I think a lot of the problem is that there's often gaps. Like everyone's just trying to do their job. So if you're a staff assistant in the political science department and your job is to put out the newsletter, you're going to figure out how to put out the newsletter, or you're going to figure out how to update the website because that's your job and you want to get paid and all that. And I think that when there's that gap of whether it's templates or education or process around how to do that, you're just going to try to figure it out. So you can't really blame people who put up crappy content because a lot of the times they don't know any better. It's not like they're consciously, maliciously trying to damage the university's brand by putting up crappy web content. They're doing the best they can. So a lot of the times the job that we have, the obligation that we have, especially at the central level, is to try to just reach out to those people and provide them with resources, or just have a conversation and say, where are the challenges here? Where are the gaps? Like, what do you need to get this done? Can we provide resources to help, university-wide have the quality and consistency of content that is going to help, support the university's brand?
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit before the show, Seth. I mean, I feel very strongly about that too, and I'm tired of hearing of, web directors or marketing teams and stuff like that pointing the finger at content creators of the assistant in the admissions office saying, why is your content crappy? That person has not been trained for the web or writing. They have no idea what's appropriate for the web. They don't understand what the goals are for all the websites. So it's about enabling content creators on campus to do good work. And for the web teams, it's their responsibility to do that. It's not the fault of that staff assistant in admissions or the career development office or student life that's trying to help.
I hope you don't mind. I want to hammer that home one more time. I mean, that's a bold statement. I like bold statements on Higher Ed Live, but it's a good point that I think a lot of people sit around, myself sometimes included, and say, these people produce terrible content. But bad content is not, you're saying that bad content is not the fault of the bad content creator. It's the fault of people that understand content strategy or web teams that aren't putting in the work to educate them. And, and just because educating them is hard doesn't mean it's not your responsibility to do that. And I think that's a good thing. I think a lot of people do point the fingers at the wrong folks, and I think that's a really, really good point to be made.
And from my experience, a lot of people working on the web are interested in learning more. It's not that they're like, turning the other cheek and like not wanting to know anything more about it. I wrote a post on MeetContent called Web Writing Guidelines for Content Contributors. And that was based on a similar guidelines that I had created for Babson College last year. And I just created it for just one web meeting. I did it one afternoon. And like a month later, I was on the other side of campus and I saw it like pasted on the wall of a conference room, and learned that, offices on the other side of campus were using that. And that people were actually interested to actually have some sort of guidelines to actually help them do better work on the web. I think that's, to get the side little pitch for MeetContent, that's like what we're trying to do there. We're trying to provide ways to enable people working on the web to do better work from a content perspective. And a lot of people are interested in doing that. They just don't know where to start.
And I think that in our teams, I think we have more opportunities we realize to sort of help improve the quality of content. I think of content management. And for so many groups and people that I know in higher ed, that's like the big bugaboos. Oh, CMS, oh, it's terrible. And I feel like oftentimes it's like there's all this like work and hand wringing that goes into the selection and who's going to maintain it, who's the developer, blah, blah, blah. And you have it and it's done and it's delightful. And then you have this poor staff assistant in admissions. It's like, okay, you're trained, go make the website. And you're like, who? Like, what are they supposed to do? Like, they know how to, select, click this button and add an image this way, but they don't know like why, whether or not they should be adding an image. Like they don't know like what to do with the content or where to get it from. So when you're part of your CMS process, you have CMS clients at your university, make content training a part of that process. Build content tips and whatnot into the actual content management system, into the interface, so that what best practices for a photo, it should be 200 by 300 pixels or whatever it is. Help empower people at every stage along the way, big picture and at the point of purchase, so to speak, how to do it more effectively. I also think of like content on the homepage, for instance. You get those emails like, put this on the homepage, and you're like, oh, I'm being assailed by these people who want me to put everything on the homepage. But do they know, like, if you have the criteria in your head of what is appropriate homepage content for your institution, but you haven't shared that with anyone, like maybe it's partly your fault because maybe you haven't shared. It's like, okay, the purpose of our homepage is X. We have A, B, and C kind of content. If you have other things, we have other channels that might be appropriate for that. So let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when I get the emails from people who are like, put this on the homepage, and I say, well, it's actually like this. They're like, to Rick's point, they're like, okay, like they just don't know. They're going to ask for things, assuming that gap of knowledge. They're just going to fill it with their assumptions and their desires. But if you provide them with the knowledge of the way things are and sort of help empower them to make smarter decisions, generally people are like, oh, okay, I didn't know, thanks. Mm-hmm. And they're going to move on, and next time they'll know better.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I obviously, one of the things that I do, I work in PR, but I run into the same thing actually with people saying, write a press release about this. And I say, that's not really newsworthy. That's not what we'd write a press release about. But things, do we have it in writing? Can I give you a list of what I would or wouldn't do? And your homepage part brings up the broader point that, if you have a strategy for the homepage and that decides what does or doesn't go up there, then all you really need to do is educate people on that strategy. So the question is, do you actually have a strategy? Are you flying by, just shooting from the hip? And if not, and you have a strategy, you're right, put it in writing and educate people. Because, if they understand the strategy behind it, then they can bring you content strategy ideas that fit that mold. And if they don't, you can have a conversation about it. But I think one of the things you bring up when you talk about, whose fault, is not putting blame, but saying, really, where does it fall if there is bad content? It's a good point that I'm not sure all of us do have real, not in stone, but written down strategies for what we're doing with different areas of our site. And that is, what are we trying to do? And that is the content strategy. We have to have that in order to tell someone yes or no with real conviction and reasons and educate them on why. So, I mean, I really like that a lot. But one point I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about is when we talk about the homepage. Obviously homepage is brought, so many times it's being run by, your central web team, your central marketing division, or central communications, depending on how your campus is set up. And these are usually the same offices or same divisions that do bigger budget, like big campaigns, marketing campaigns and stuff like that. And, Georgie, one thing that you've said before that I really like is that, you could do the best huge marketing campaign all you want, but if you don't have a content strategy behind that, what you're doing day to day is literally going to be undermining what you're paying for. And that what your real brand is at the end of the day is the sum of its parts. And I don't talk a little bit about that because I think it's a really good point that I really thought differently when you brought that up, that people really need to think about what they're doing day to day, not just what they're spending big money on in some kind of ad campaign.
Yeah, I mean, whatever, vendor that you bring in to develop your 7-figure brand messaging, whatever, big strategy that is really shiny, it's going to be in a nice book that's going to sit on your VP's desk and it's very pretty. At the end of the day, where that gets executed and how that impacts and is communicated to your community is going to be in a tweet. It's going to be in a news story. It's going to be on the text on the homepage or your department website. It's going to be in those little areas. And the way I look at content is as the foot soldier of your brand. It's going out there. It's going over the trench and fighting the fight for you. And if you're not, basically giving it the ammunition it needs, and the ammunition being a strategy, then it's just going to be wasted because you're going to be tweeting about, whatever, something that is not really relevant to what your institution is trying to communicate about itself. So, that little tweet has to tie back to that broader strategy. It all has to sort of, work along a chain. or else those day-to-day content efforts will be, won't you'll have wasted all that money that on that big strategy that those little bits of content are designed to execute. And it's making sure that you see the connection between the day-to-day content and the bigger strategy that is going to help that strategy succeed.
I think it's just a really, really great point that, you can spend all the money you want on some big campaign, but if day to day, every tweet, every update, every blog post, every article, if you're not backing that up with the same strategy and thinking about it the same way, you're not going to achieve your goals at all. You're not going to reach that. So, one of the things that this brings up to me is that, there's a big, obviously, a gap between people that would advocate for this and maybe the higher level administrators or decision makers. How do you close this gap and bring people together? Because when you're talking about this, a lot of this stuff is big picture stuff. And in higher ed, a lot of times big picture means corner office, three-piece suit, the people that aren't always connected to the people that are a little bit, on the ground, actually making this stuff happen. How do you bring those parties together and kind of close that gap to really achieve this?
Education and shame. So we talked about education, but I think it also helps to show, to ask some really challenging, important questions and look at the blank stares on, decision makers' faces. How did you decide what content to update? How are you deciding what content to create? These are like deceptively simple questions, but you ask somebody that, and they, look behind them, hoping someone else is going to answer. That's why I'm always like, on the analytics strategy front, which I'm always advocating for as well. You can't make decisions on superficial like dashboard metrics and stuff like that. You actually have to have, some sort of plan there. You have to understand what you're doing.
Yeah, the sharpest weapon in your arsenal is going to be a good question. If you can really just ask a question that's going to get to the heart of it. And yeah, it might, you're going to have those blank stares, but you know what? Those blank stares might embarrass them into funding your content strategist. So,
I don't disagree.
I was in I was placed in a situation where I was actually trying to make the case for content strategy, and it was a room full of marketing directors, and I asked some of those fundamental questions. How are you making these decisions about what content to create and update, what to put on your website? And finally, after moments of silence, one person stepped forward and said, whoever, sent the email first, or whoever is speaking the loudest or asking the loudest. Their decisions are not made without a strategy. Decisions are made on a first come first basis, but that's not necessarily, a good way to prioritize content needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll have to be honest, shame does work. I've used that before as well. And honestly, it does. And it doesn't hurt also, this is a question we didn't talk about, but it also helps in higher, we talk about education, shame, and sometimes pointing to your competitors. So the tough thing is, are there any examples out there of an institution that's doing this really well? Or is this not the kind of thing that maybe any institution whole cloth is doing really well, and it's more just about finding pockets within schools that, or within a university that's doing a good job? Are there any examples we can point to, or is that not really available yet at this stage? I don't know. I just threw that there. I don't know. I don't know of any. Like, I would point, for instance, to your blog over a college university. But a lot of times when I advocate for something, I say, look at what these guys did. They're doing something. But I don't know. Maybe it's
about the network of higher ed professionals that we have who watch the show, who join our LinkedIn group. The great thing about having that network is you can sort of see like what other people are doing. You can learn from them, and you can also, if it's a peer institution, you could point to them and be like, here's this institution, here's the structure that they have, and here's what they achieve with that. We're a comparable institution. Maybe we should consider, this to achieve our goals. And here's the data that shows that we're not really achieving our goals.
And one thing I would suggest is when you're looking for good examples of content, look beyond the homepage. Don't just look at higher ed websites' homepages, but look at their financial aid section. I'll give you one example. I was recently looking for some good cases for financial aid information in higher ed. Some good ways, some sites that are doing some good ways of talking about that. And my alma mater, Emerson College, I think does a pretty good job of it. I was looking at that. They're very candid and upfront about the fact, hey, living in Boston is expensive. It doesn't come cheap. They're not trying to hide behind those really harsh realities. They're being upfront about it, but they're saying, here's why it's worth it, and here is how we can help. make it affordable.
I think that gets to a really good point about keeping your user in mind when developing content, because not just like organizationally, you may want to be like, oh, we're kind of an expensive city, like, oh, that's kind of a liability, but it's being upfront, and the content shapes, it addresses the questions that the user is going to come to that page with like, how am I going to live in Boston as a college student? Like, how am I going to make that happen? And right up, the content seems to address that question, and that's having empathy for your users. That's being user-centric.
Yeah. And when we're talking about examples, by the way, I got to just give a shout out because it's right in the tweet stream right now. Julianne Tuttle says about Ball State that their content creators on campus are required to attend both brand and tech trainings before accessing CMS. And that's a really good point.
Wow.
2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up for that. And I would also say that's just really good use of understanding, like, essentially a point in a relationship. When someone's doesn't have access to CMS and then they do, that's the point where you can make them jump through a couple hoops. You can bring them together. You can talk to them. You know, that's a really great example of something that's probably relatively simple to replicate once you kind of get this training together. But you just make everybody, when the new person's hired and they need access to the site, they have to go and take care of this. It's the same thing in higher ed accounts payable. You know, anyone that gets hired in an institution and you're going to get, you know, a card where you can buy things, or, you know, you're going to handle money. There's all these checks and balances where you have to go through this class first or learn something first. It's really the same exact thing with content strategies. Just finding that point in someone's relationship with their institution where they should go through this training. So I just think that's actually a great example. That's one that I think I'm going to be pulling out and using when I talk about this personally. So great example. I appreciate that. So holler to the tweet stream, guys. I like it.
Yeah, nice job.
Yeah. So, you know, now when we're talking about advocating for content strategy at your institution, you know, for the folks watching now, we've talked about a lot of stuff, but, you know, what other things can they do? Do you have any takeaways on what people should do if they want to advocate for this tomorrow, if they want to go into the office and have this conversation?
Sure. Ask why. Why are we doing it this way? Why do we have this content here? Why do we have a Twitter account? I mean, the question of why is not asked often enough. And I think that's one of the big advantages of having a content-focused person, is actually asking why for all these different types of content. I mean, even something as common as a contact us page, if it doesn't have a purpose, it shouldn't be there. You should be able to answer why for every piece of content on your website. And if you can't do it, it shouldn't be there.
My suggestion for what you can do tomorrow is just to start talking about content and don't shut up. Just any place that you can find, invite yourself to meetings, go reach out to those content contributors that you haven't met yet, and go just buy them a coffee and be like, I want to listen to you and talk about what you're doing. You know, I say don't shut up about it, but also don't stop listening about it. So it's putting yourself at the table. It's hearing what other people have to say, where their pain points are, where those gaps are that you can bridge with meaningful resources and assistance and templates and whatever else is needed. You know, just start preaching the good word about it to whoever will listen. Go tell it on the mountain. Just make it happen. And just, you know, be a loudmouth about it, and also be an avid listener about it. Because there's a lot of people, you know, there's that staff assistant in admissions who, God bless her or him, needs our help. And as soon as we find that person and can sort of have a conversation with them, that's when the ball will start rolling.
That's a really good point. And especially because some of this stuff I think can be handled with, a best practices document, or giving people templates, or giving them resources to empower themselves. But some of this stuff isn't cut or dry. And that's why the why question too, I just love that. It's so important. I mean, one debate that's still been going on, I see in higher ed, is, should we have a frequently asked questions page or not? And if people need to go there for their question to be answered, well, maybe we should answer it differently. But it's a thing like that where that should be an ongoing conversation. Those are things that should be brought up and people should talk about. And if nothing else, you're right, the question of why, we'll pull that out. And because some things are going to be cut and dry and some things aren't, but just because they're not doesn't mean you don't have to have that conversation. And I will say, the point I love about this too is just because no one has raised the question yet doesn't get you off the hook for raising it. So even if no one else has said it yet on your campus, that doesn't mean it's okay for you not to. I love it. I really hope people start firing this up more. So, guys, as we kind of start to slowly wrap up the content first approach for the higher ed web, which, by the way, I totally agree. You cannot put the cart before the horse. If you don't, how can you build something if you don't know what the content's going to be like, look like, feel like? It doesn't make sense to me. You need to have a strategy for it. What are some final resources? Because, obviously my final resource is going to be your site, MeetContent.com. I think it'll be most people's, but, are there any other resources out there for folks that want to continue to have this dialogue?
Well, on MeetContent, we have a library with a lot of great resources. Like we said, foundational articles, blogs, books, etc. I think that some of the seminal books that are in the field. Obviously, I was just at Penn State Web Conference last week, and Christina Halverson, author of Content Strategy for the Web, gave a really great keynote that got a lot of people in the audience fired up about thinking about content. So I think that, oh, wait, we have a visual aid.
All right.
Yes.
That's a great, sort of overview. There's also, if you're looking for sort of like a more pocket-sized overview, there's a recent book by Aaron Kassane called The Elements of Content Strategy, which is a quick read, but a great sort of high-level overview of a lot of the different areas and things that you need to start thinking about.
Did you just mention Content Rules?
I haven't mentioned it yet,
Oh,
but you can.
So one of the books that we also like is Content Rules. That's one by Ann Hadley and C.C. Chapman, and one of our favorite chapters in there is one called Reimagining Content. And I would just advocate everybody go and read that chapter. It's the idea that there's so much content being created in our organization. It's just making the most use out of it as we can. And something like I was asked recently, what's the value of an alumni magazine? Do people are even reading this stuff anymore? But the reality is, right, this represents some of the most highest quality content that your institution creates, really high quality writing and photos, but it's just stuck in this little magazine sitting on the coffee table in your alumni office. Why isn't that online? Why isn't that a source of content for featured stories on your homepage or other areas or blogs? Make use of all this really great content that exists, or maybe not so great, but could be made great.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I guess I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show today and talking about this. It's something that I'm only recently been following largely, trying to read all the posts that you guys put out. But, it really does seem that, a content-first approach for content strategy, content strategy is like the thread that holds your brand together. This is all the little pieces that ties it all together at once. And it's something that, while daunting and seems like a huge task, could still start with just a light conversation between a couple people in your office. Like you said, George, earlier, start small. This thing can snowball, I think, and I will say on a personal level, I've had really positive experiences giving people templates and telling people things. And as soon as you explain the why to someone of like, why do we not want to send out all our event announcements as PDF attachments? If you explain things to people, a lot of times they do understand. It's just that no one's ever taught them before. So I love it. Do you guys have any final thoughts before we sign off? Because my final thought is check out MeetContent.com, but I want to give you guys any last-minute plug to fire people up and make sure they walk in tomorrow and they make this happen.
I think that's a great plug. But I would also say, find ways to bridge the understanding gap. Start building your relationships that are going to help your content strategy get off the ground at your institution.
And I'll add that clearly, Georgie and I have a lot to say on the topic of content, and we have a lot of opinions about it. But we'd love to hear more from other people. So we'd love to hear what ideas other people have about it, and also give us some ideas on good topics to write about and talk about.
Yeah.
What are the challenges going on at your school that would be helpful for us to address?
Yeah, we really want this to be a resource for the higher ed community. So if there's pain points or there's issues or topics that everyone out there wants to hear about, please let us know, because that's what we want to write about.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for coming on the show, and thank you guys at home for watching Higher Ed Live. We're wrapping up another episode, but you know what? We're going to be back next week with a special in-studio show with the one and only Student Affairs Master and Maestro himself, Ed Cabellin, and we're having a very cool conversation about building campus community. How do you build a campus community that fosters your students' creativity, that empowers them, and makes them have the best experience possible? You'd be surprised, but what you do every day plays directly into that. And it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I hope you guys watch it, because when I've talked to Ed, every person on campus impacts students. And you change the way their experiences, and if you change their experience, you can change their lives. And this is big picture stuff, but it's really cool, and Ed is the man to talk to about that. So he's in LA. I'm forcing him to come hang out at Higher Ed Live headquarters, a.k.a. my house. And we're going to have a great time next week talking all about that. So lastly, too, check out tomorrow for a new post from me on QR codes and how I was wrong to say they're entirely stupid, because I kind of got schooled, and I'm going to admit that. So that's going to be it for us here. Check out HigherEdLive.com. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and I will see you guys next week. I hope you all have a fantastic little bit rest of your weekend, what's left of it. I'll see you guys soon.